My parents said I wasn't ready to sit with the family yet. So I stayed home, and if this story touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Lacey Whitmore, and I've never truly felt like part of my own family. I'm 22 now, but the truth is I've always felt like an outsider. My parents, Russell and Diane, gave their love and attention to my younger sister Brinley, who's only 2 years younger than me. To anyone looking from the outside, we looked like a picture-perfect family. Inside our house, though, I was always left out. Since I was little, I was told I wasn't ready. Not ready to join family dinners. Not ready to be included in Christmas morning. Not ready to be part of birthdays, milestones, or moments that mattered. While Brinley sat at the table with smiles and laughter, I sat alone, waiting for someone to notice me. No one ever did. One evening, while they all went out to another dinner I wasn't invited to, I stayed home. The silence in the house felt louder than ever, and I wandered from room to room just to fill the emptiness. For some reason, I climbed up into the attic. It was dusty and dim, filled with boxes stacked in forgotten corners. I don't know what I was searching for, maybe just a distraction, but I found something I was never meant to see. Tucked behind some old furniture was a heavy wooden box, its lid covered in dust. I pulled it out and sat cross-legged on the floor. When I opened it, I saw old letters, photographs, and documents. At first, I thought it was just storage, maybe family keepsakes. But the more I looked, the stranger it became. Some letters talked about a deal. I didn't know what deal, but it sounded serious, almost secret. When I picked up some photographs, I noticed my name written on the back of a few, but scratched out, like someone had wanted to erase me from them. That made my stomach turn. Why would anyone do that? I kept digging and found notes in my mother's handwriting. They were half crossed out, but I could read enough to see there was something about my birth. The way the words were hidden, almost torn out of the page, made it clear that whatever was written there was something they never wanted me to know. Sitting in the dusty attic with those papers in my lap, I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just favoritism. It wasn't just me being less loved than Brinley. There was something else. A secret big enough that my parents had tried to bury it for years. In that moment, I knew one thing for sure. My whole life of being left out wasn't an accident. It was planned, and the answers were sitting right there in that box. When my parents came back that night, I couldn't keep quiet. I walked straight into the kitchen where my mom was unpacking leftovers from the dinner I wasn't invited to. My heart was pounding, but I forced the words out. I told her about the box I had found in the attic, about the letters and the strange notes. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would finally explain everything. Instead, she spun around with fire in her eyes and snapped at me. She told me I was imagining things, that I was making up stories to get attention. The sharpness in her voice cut me down like it always did, but this time it felt different. I wasn't making things up. I knew what I saw. Before I could answer, Brinley walked in. She had probably been listening from the hallway. With a smirk on her face, she said I was lucky to even live under the same roof. The way she said it wasn't teasing. It was cruel, like she actually believed I didn't belong there. She laughed at me, enjoying how my mother's anger pressed me into a corner. My hands were shaking, but I bit my tongue. If I argued, they'd only use it as proof that I was the problem. Later that night, I tried asking my dad about it instead. He was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV, but not really watching it. I sat down beside him and asked simple questions about when I was little, hoping he'd open up. Every time I brought up the past, he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He rubbed his hands together, avoided my eyes, and gave short answers that didn't explain anything. He wasn't yelling at me like Mom did, but he was hiding something. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the nervous flick of his eyes toward the floor. For a while I thought maybe I was just overthinking. Maybe I was searching too hard for meaning. But then something happened that pushed away all doubt. A few days later, I was outside when our neighbor, Mrs. Carraway, walked over. She was in her late 60s, always friendly but sharp enough to notice what went on in our house. She looked at me carefully, like she was debating whether to say something. Then she leaned in and whispered, "Sweetheart, you don't know the half of it. They never planned for you." Her words hit me harder than anything my mom or sister had said. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she only shook her head and patted my arm before walking away. I stood there, stunned, the neighbor's warning echoing in my mind. That night, lying in bed, I replayed everything. My mother's anger, Brinley's mocking, my father's nervous silence, and now this cryptic message. It all connected into something darker than I had ever imagined. My whole life, I thought I was just less loved, less wanted. But what if it wasn't just favoritism? What if my parents had been keeping me out on purpose? The thought chilled me. For the first time, I realized that maybe I wasn't only excluded. I was never meant to be part of the family at all. One afternoon, when my parents and Brinley left the house, I finally had the chance to look for answers on my own. My hands were sweaty as I turned the knob to the office, a room I was rarely allowed in. The blinds were shut, and the air smelled faintly of my dad's cologne. My heart thudded in my chest as I stepped inside, every creak of the floor making me nervous they'd come back too soon. I started slowly, checking drawers and cabinets. At first, all I found were bills, tax forms, and old envelopes. Nothing unusual. But then, at the bottom of a locked cabinet I managed to pry open with a paperclip, I found a slim folder. The cover was plain, but when I opened it, I froze. Inside were official documents, legal papers. My eyes scanned the words, and my stomach turned cold. They were adoption papers. The name on them wasn't mine. It was Brinley's. I read the lines over and over, not believing it. My little sister, the one my parents adored and placed above me, wasn't their biological child. She was adopted. The air seemed to leave the room as I let that sink in. All this time, I thought I was the one who didn't fit, the one who must have been brought in from the outside. But it wasn't me. It was her. I grabbed the next set of documents from the folder, and my eyes widened again. These papers mentioned inheritance, tied to the Whitmore family estate. My name was written clearly in the conditions. Everything that once belonged to my grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, was meant to pass directly to me. The farmhouse, the land, the savings, it was all mine by right. The words felt heavy, like they were changing the very ground under my feet. As I sat there, the pieces began to fall into place. My parents hadn't favored Brinley just because they loved her more. They favored her because she was easier to shape, easier to control. I was the one with the legal claim to everything, the one my grandmother had chosen to inherit what she built. But my parents had pushed me aside, made me feel small, and tried to convince me I didn't belong. If I never learned the truth, they could continue treating Brinley as their golden child and keep me in the shadows. The realization was crushing and freeing all at once. I wasn't the outsider I had always thought I was. I was the rightful heir. And suddenly, every cold look, every time they told me I wasn't ready, every moment they left me out made a cruel kind of sense. They weren't just being unfair parents, they were protecting a lie. I closed the folder with trembling hands, slid everything back the way I found it, and walked out of the office quietly. My knees felt weak, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. For the first time in my life, I understood that I had power they had been desperate to hide from me. And now that I knew the truth, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't keep the truth inside me any longer. The papers I found had been replaying in my head nonstop, and I knew I had to confront someone. I chose my dad because I thought maybe, just maybe, he would be the one to give me an honest answer. One evening, I found him alone in the living room. The TV was on, but he wasn't paying attention to it. I sat down across from him, my heart racing, and asked straight out about the inheritance and the documents with my name on them. At first, he tried to dodge my questions. He rubbed his temples, sighed, and said I didn't understand what I had seen. But I pushed harder, reminding him that I wasn't a child anymore and that I deserved the truth. After a long silence, he leaned forward, his voice heavy with guilt. He admitted that everything I had discovered was real. My grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, had left her entire estate to me in her will. Not to him, not to my mom, not to Brinley, just me. Hearing it out loud made my chest ache. My grandmother had trusted me with everything, yet I had been kept completely in the dark. My dad explained that he and my mom had resented the decision. They thought it was unfair, that I hadn't earned it, that giving it all to me would ruin the balance of the family. So instead of telling me the truth, they decided to shut me out little by little. They made me feel unwanted on purpose, hoping that by breaking me down, I would never question what was mine. Before I could even process his words, my mom walked into the room. She must have overheard part of it because her face was red with fury. She turned on my dad first, shouting at him for opening his mouth. Then she turned on me, her voice sharp and cruel. She told me I was never wanted, not from the very beginning. The venom in her words left no space for doubt. She wasn't just angry, she meant every word. As if that wasn't enough, Brinley appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes gleaming like she had been waiting for this moment. She smirked and sided with my mom instantly. With a laugh, she called me a mistake. Her tone wasn't joking or playful. It was filled with hate, like she truly believed I shouldn't even exist. I sat there, stunned, as their voices echoed around me. My father's guilt, my mother's anger, my sister's cruelty. All of it blended into a storm I couldn't escape. But beneath the pain, something else settled inside me. Clarity. My entire childhood, every cold shoulder, every missed dinner, every holiday where I was left out, it had all been part of their plan. They hadn't just been neglectful parents. They had been scheming, trying to keep me so broken and small that I'd never dare to claim what was mine. For the first time, I saw the truth of my life for what it was. I wasn't just unwanted. I had been deliberately betrayed. And that betrayal was going to change everything. After the blow-up with my family, I wanted to scream and throw everything in their faces. But instead of showing my anger, I forced myself to stay calm. I acted like I was shaken, like I didn't understand what was happening. Around them, I pretended to be confused and even a little scared. It was the only way to keep them from guessing what I was planning. When I was alone, though, I knew I needed help. I remembered the name written on the documents I had seen in the office, Richard Kane. He had been my grandmother's attorney, and I hoped he could give me the truth without twisting it like my parents did. I found his office number and called, my hands trembling as the phone rang. Richard's voice was steady, professional, but also kind when I explained who I was. I asked if I could meet him, and he agreed. The next day, I drove to his office, trying not to imagine what my parents would do if they found out. Sitting across from him, I handed over the details I had pieced together. He listened carefully, nodding as if none of it surprised him. Then he confirmed everything. He told me my grandmother had been very clear. Her estate was mine. The farmhouse, the land, and even a large amount of savings had been left in my name. He said my grandmother trusted me to take care of it, that she had wanted me to be the one to carry on her legacy. My chest tightened as he spoke, because for the first time, someone wasn't denying it or calling me crazy. But Richard also gave me a warning. He said my parents had been stalling for years, finding ways to delay the paperwork, keeping me in the dark so I wouldn't act. He leaned forward and told me plainly, if you don't file the claim soon, they'll find a loophole. They'll use it to take everything. The seriousness in his voice made my stomach sink. My parents weren't just cruel. They were desperate enough to cheat me out of what was rightfully mine. I left his office with my mind racing. The anger I had been holding back started to burn brighter, but I didn't let it control me. Instead, I began to think carefully about my next steps. I couldn't just storm home and confront them again. That would only give them a chance to twist things, maybe even hide more evidence. I had to be smarter than that, so I played my part at home. I kept my head down, acted quiet, and pretended like I was lost in confusion. My mom seemed pleased, Brinley mocked me as usual, and my dad avoided my eyes. None of them knew I was already taking steps to claim what was mine. Deep down, though, I wasn't broken. I was building something. My plan wasn't about shouting or fighting in the moment. It was about waiting, preparing, and striking when they least expected it. Quiet revenge. The kind that couldn't be undone. The whole house smelled like potato salad and old perfume. Today was the reunion everyone kept talking about for weeks. I heard cars in the driveway and laughter through the walls, and my chest tightened when I remembered the way they always said I wasn't ready to sit with them. I told myself I wouldn't let it ruin me, but the sting was there like a small, steady pain. Instead of staying in my room, I did something they would never expect. I waited until the garage door closed and the last boot thumped on the porch. Then I slipped into the dining room with my heart beating fast. The table was set perfectly, napkins folded like little houses, silverware gleaming. The head of the table looked empty and obvious, like an invitation someone had left by mistake. I sat down. My hands were steady, even when my throat tightened. It didn't take long for someone to notice. Diane came in first, spotting me like a hawk. Her face lost color and then flamed red with anger. She opened her mouth as if to shout, but I didn't move. Brinley was right behind her, trailing smirk and whispers, like she already knew how this would go. For a moment, the room blurred with the sound of voices far away. I felt calm in the middle of the storm. When Diane lunged forward and demanded I get up, I looked at her and said nothing at first. I let the quiet do the work, let the weight of my decision sit in the air between us. Then, steady and clear, I said, I have every right to sit here, and soon you'll understand why. My words didn't curl or wobble. They landed. You could see the way their faces changed, like someone had turned a light switch. Diane screamed. It was loud and hurtful, the kind of scream that carries through rooms and sticks to your bones. Brinley laughed, sharp and cruel, and launched into a string of insults. She called me names meant to cut. Russell moved first. He reached out and tried to pull me from the chair like I was a child who had gotten out of line. His hands were rough on my shoulders, the motion half angry, half panicked. I didn't let him yank me. I held my place and felt my spine go hard with something like iron. When his hand tightened, I pushed it away. Not hard, just enough to show I wasn't going to be dragged. The room tried to collapse on me with voices and accusations, but I didn't step down. I left the table not because they finally asked me politely, but because I wanted to. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked out of the dining room with my head held high. As I crossed the hall, the noise followed me like a storm. I could feel anger, betrayal, and 100 small humiliations rising in their voices. Outside, the air felt cool and real. My breath came faster, and my hands trembled, but there was a smile I couldn't hide. It wasn't a big smile. It was small and fierce. Inside, they were losing their balance. I had shown up where they wanted me missing, and that shook them. I wasn't just angry anymore. I felt satisfied. Not because I had yelled or broken things, but because I had taken a step that could not be taken back. They had always thought I would quietly accept my place. Today I proved them wrong. The day came when I finally signed the papers with Richard by my side. His office smelled of old books and leather, the kind of place where secrets felt safe. He walked me through every step, calm and steady, while I held the pen in my shaking hand. When I finished writing my name, it felt like a line had been drawn in the sand. For once, I wasn't just reacting to what my family did to me. I was making my own move. It didn't take long before the notice was sent out. My parents got the official letter, the one that made it clear everything legally belonged to me. The estate, the farmhouse, the money, every bit of it had my name attached. I wasn't there when they first opened it, but I didn't need to be. The silence in the house when I walked in later that evening told me enough. The storm was waiting. My mom came at me first, her eyes wide and her voice trembling. Diane didn't scream this time. Instead, she tried to twist her tone into something soft, almost desperate. She told me I misunderstood, that families share, that love mattered more than paperwork. She reached for my hand like she wanted to comfort me, but it was fake, and I knew it. My dad wasn't far behind. Russell paced the room, his face pale, his words stumbling over each other. He kept saying they only wanted what was fair, that I was too young to handle all the responsibility. He tried to remind me of times he had helped me, as if those small moments could erase years of being pushed aside. At one point, his voice cracked, and he almost sounded like he was begging. But the truth was, he wasn't asking for me. He was asking for himself. Then Brinley cut in. She didn't bother with kindness. Her eyes burned with anger, and her words hit me like stones. She called me selfish, accused me of being greedy, said I was tearing the family apart. She acted like I had stolen something from her, when deep down she knew it was never hers. Every word she threw at me was meant to make me doubt myself, to drag me back into the shadow where they wanted me. But for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink or apologize. I stood there and let them speak, my face calm even though my heart was racing. I thought about all the nights I had spent alone, all the dinners I wasn't invited to, all the times I was told I wasn't ready. And I realized something powerful. I wasn't the weak girl they had raised me to be. When they finished, I simply told them the truth. The estate was mine, the farmhouse was mine, and no amount of begging or name-calling could change that. I wasn't backing down. I had signed my name, and now the tide had turned. For once, the power wasn't in their hands. It was in mine, and I wasn't letting go. It didn't take long before the whole town knew. News like this travels faster than anything, and soon people were whispering everywhere I went. At the grocery store, I felt the stares. At the gas station, I heard people lower their voices when I walked by. They weren't looking at me with pity, though. They were looking at me with something closer to respect, like they finally saw what I had gone through. It was my parents' reputation that began to break, not mine. I heard stories from neighbors about how Diane complained to anyone who would listen. She tried to paint herself as the victim, saying I had turned on my own family, that I was ungrateful and cruel. But the more she talked, the less people believed her. Folks in town remembered the times they had seen me left out of events, standing alone while my parents paraded Brinley around. Once the truth about the will came out, It wasn't hard for them to put the pieces together. Relatives started calling too. Some wanted to know if it was true, their voices careful, not sure what to believe. Others admitted they had always suspected something was off. Diane tried to rally them, tried to twist the story so that I looked like the greedy one, but it didn't work the way she hoped. Many of them were shocked, even disgusted, by what my parents had done to me. Instead of siding with her, some of them stopped returning her calls altogether. One afternoon, as I was watering the small garden outside, I saw Mrs. Carraway walking up the path. Her steps were slow, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She smiled at me in that gentle way she always did, then put her hand on mine. "Your grandmother always knew you were stronger than they wanted you to be," she said softly. Her words sank deep inside me. I felt my throat tighten because in that moment I could almost hear my grandmother's voice, the one I had missed for so many years. I thanked her, and she squeezed my hand before heading back home. It was a short visit, but it meant more than she probably realized. I stood there after she left, staring at the garden and feeling the mix of emotions swirling in me. There was grief, deep grief for the family I never truly had, for the years I had lost trying to win their approval. But along with the sadness was something new. Strength. Empowerment. The kind of feeling that grows when chains finally fall away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in their shadow. I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the one told to stay home, the one always waiting to be invited in. I had taken back what was mine, and even though the betrayal burned, I also felt free. Free to start over, free to build something that belonged only to me. And standing there in the quiet, I realized freedom was worth every painful truth I had uncovered. I stood in the doorway of the farmhouse, the keys heavy in my hand. The place was mine now, every inch of it. The walls, the land, the memories that belonged to my grandmother, all of it had passed to me. My parents and Brinley came with their bags packed, their faces pale, their eyes full of disbelief. They still thought they could change my mind, even now. Diane was the first to speak. Her voice cracked as she asked me to reconsider, saying families should stick together, that mistakes had been made but could be forgiven. She looked at me like she expected me to bend, like I always had before. Russell added his own words, talking about second chances and asking me to be reasonable. Brinley didn't even try to sound kind. She shouted, called me heartless, accused me of ruining everything. But I didn't move. I had carried their cruelty on my shoulders for too long, and now it was their turn to feel the weight of being shut out. My voice was steady when I told them, "You never made space for me at the table. Now there's no space for you." The silence that followed was heavy, like the words had cut deeper than they expected. They tried again, voices softer this time. Diane pleaded with tears in her eyes. Russell put his hand on the wall like he was saying goodbye to a piece of himself. Brinley, however, only grew louder. She swore she would get back at me, that she'd find a way to take what she believed was hers. But even as she shouted, I saw the truth in her eyes. She had no power left. Her anger was just noise, nothing more. I didn't give in. Every paper, every signature was on my side. The law was clear, and my grandmother's wishes were even clearer. Everything belonged to me, and I wasn't going to give any of it away. Not the farmhouse, not the land, not the savings. They had taken my childhood, my sense of belonging, my place in the family. They weren't going to take this too. When the last of their bags were carried out, I walked them to the edge of the porch. Their steps were slow, their shoulders heavy with defeat. Diane wouldn't look me in the eye. Russell mumbled something I couldn't hear, and Brinley stomped ahead, throwing one last hateful glance over her shoulder. None of it touched me anymore. I waited until they were all outside before I stepped back into the house. I closed the door, turned the lock, and leaned against the wood for a moment. The quiet inside was sharp but comforting. For the first time, they were the ones on the outside looking in. For the first time, I was the one with the power to decide who belonged here. As the lock clicked into place, I knew it was finished. They were gone, and this home was mine at last. The first night in the farmhouse felt strange. The air inside was quiet, carrying only the creaks of the old wood and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I walked through each room slowly, letting my fingers brush across the furniture that once belonged to my grandmother. Every corner felt heavy with memory, but it also felt like it was waiting for me. For once, I wasn't a guest or someone standing on the outside. This was my home. When I stepped into the dining room, my eyes went straight to the long table. I remembered the times I had dreamed of sitting at a table like this with my family, being part of something instead of always kept away. Now the chairs were empty, and the silence filled the space. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, my hands resting on the polished surface. The emptiness around me was sharp at first. No laughter, no voices, no clinking of dishes. But slowly, I realized it didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. I wasn't excluded anymore. I didn't need anyone's permission to sit here. The place at the head of the table was mine, and it always had been. I whispered softly to the quiet room. I was always ready. The words echoed in my mind, stronger than I expected. I thought about all the times I had been told I wasn't enough, wasn't ready, wasn't worthy. Yet here I was, sitting in the very seat they tried to keep from me. The silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like freedom. I leaned back in the chair and let myself imagine what came next. I pictured dinners I would host, not filled with cruel words or fake smiles, but with warmth and honesty. I thought about opening the doors to people who cared, people who would treat me with the respect I had always deserved. This table, this house, this legacy, it wouldn't be a place of pain anymore. I would make sure of that. Outside the window, the sun began to set, casting golden light across the fields. I thought of my grandmother, of the strength she must have seen in me to leave all this in my name. I felt close to her in that moment, as if she had been waiting for me to claim the life she knew I deserved. As the shadows stretched across the room, I stayed seated at the table, steady and calm. My parents were gone, living with the weight of their choices, and Brinley's threats no longer frightened me. They had built their lives on lies, and now they had to carry the ruin of it. I, on the other hand, had finally stepped into the truth. The silence of the farmhouse was no longer heavy. It was mine, and in that stillness I felt peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be let in. I was already home. Do you think Lacey did the right thing by shutting her family out, or should she have given them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.